Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Dissecting Diddy podcast. We're going to be doing this over the next several weeks during the course of the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy trial. And we just wanted an opportunity to kind of wrap up the week's events in court because there's been a lot. And Cassie Ventura is still on the witness stand during cross-examination. And when it's all over, it's likely that she will have spent a full 4 days on the stand. So we're going to get right to it. Joining me is my esteemed colleague, Nicole Johnson, who obviously took part in our big Dissecting Diddy special. And we have criminal defense attorney, Yohayra Azcona, who was gracious enough to return with us to have an informal conversation. There's nothing formal about this. We're just going to be talking and chatting as if we were outside, talking about, what's happening with the case, because there are a lot of interesting takes. In the comments, you'll see everyone has their own opinion, and I'm sure we do as well.
And you've been in the courtroom.
I have.
Since this trial started.
I have.
Sitting not too far from Sean Diddy Combs, his family, yep. Some of the spectators and the media.
Yeah, I think the first takeaway I had is I was so thrown off by how gray his hair is. Jail is stressful.
Yeah, and you don't get dye in that federal
exactly.
holding.
And we honestly don't know how much dye he was using before all of this, right? I know in the summertime when I go on vacation, if I let my beard grow, it's all salt and pepper.
Santa Claus.
Right?
And I also
Thanks,
think
Nick.
it's part of the strategy.
They got jokes now.
Everything about his physical appearance, his attire, is very far and removed from the Sean Combs that we know.
Super
Someone
polished,
that
right?
is
Yeah.
super elegant, fancy, fly. I think that this appearance is being embraced because I think it's a fair way to neutralize him, to make him seem more human and more like us or more like the jury. I think that, and Cassie said it in part of her testimony, that he's this larger than life figure. And I think that if he was to parade himself in the courtroom as this larger than life figure and as this person who even has these resources in prison, I think that it's going to boost the prosecutor's position. And I think it's going to speak to that power and that influence and that control that he has, that everyone has witnessed. So I think that taking away all of the fancy garments and the, luxury facials and the hair dye really, bears him. Exactly.
He was just given, 5 shirts, 5 pair of pants, and a few sweaters.
And he's not even wearing a suit. It's my understanding it's a sweater,
like
khaki slacks.
Look, right?
Exactly.
I want to talk about what everybody else is talking about. Everybody's talking about Cassie Ventura's testimony. And
which part?
Okay, well, I showed both of you my notes, my chicken scratch. Neither one of you wanted to read it, so I had to read it to you. And we cannot read it out loud because of how explicit
don't read it out
is.
loud. Don't read it out loud.
But I feel like we were inside a personal relationship, seeing discussions that were never intended to be seen by the public.
Absolutely.
How do you think these play with the jury?
So it's twofolded, right? And it's the defense attorney in me.
Right.
I see consent all throughout. However, it's important to recognize that in every relationship, not just romantic, there are moments where you say yes, and there are moments where you say no. And I think that that's the issue here. The prosecutor, and I said this last time, is gonna have to identify and isolate those moments where she said no. And they're going to have to do so in a very clear-cut, concise way, because there are so many moments where she said yes.
So how does all of that fit into what really matters in the courtroom, which is those 2 criminal charges that carry, such a heavy sentence, right? The racketeering conspiracy and the sex trafficking.
Great question. So, and I've been talking to some of my colleagues about this. It seems like a DV trial, right? And there's a lot of emphasis on those experiences and those moments. And technically, that doesn't help prove any of the federal prosecutor's elements or case. But my position is 2 things. Not only do they want her testimony because it impacts the way that the jury is going to perceive Sean Diddy Combs, but I also think that her testimony is what's going to solidify and give witness testimony as to the sex workers and the individuals that were transferred against state lines. So if you notice through her testimony, she's very specifically mentioning Las Vegas, New York, LA, Miami, even worldwide and international freak-offs. And then she's also identifying this individual from such and such app or such and such agency came into the state to provide these commercial sexual services. And I think that indirectly, it's a way for them to lay the groundwork as to why these people were coming into these different states and crossing these state lines, and why, and most importantly, who was orchestrating them.
Well, that's
that
one of the
being
charges,
China.
right?
That is one of the
Transportation for the
charges.
intent of prosecution.
Yes, exactly. And that's kind of my point.
And you don't have to prove, you don't have to say someone was forced to prove sex trafficking. It can be willingly crossing state lines.
Exactly. You can consensually break the law or do illegal things. People do that all the time. People engage in criminal conduct knowing it's illegal, but understanding that there's a bigger goal for them at the end.
But why bring Cassie up now? We talked about this earlier. She is very pregnant, 8.5 months pregnant. So the timing is important. They could have waited until after her pregnancy, she delivers her baby, or made her first in the case so that the defense could have more time to cross-examine.
I think that's an interesting question. It's something that I ask myself as well. The reason that I would have started the way that I did, or if I were the prosecutors, would be because I wanted to give context. I wanted to give like a bird's eye view of what happened on the day that he assaulted her on the video. Because they called a security officer that arrived on the scene, who's now, by the way, a law enforcement officer. And I think that speaks to his credibility and definitely works to the favor of the prosecutors. But I think that if they would have gone into Cassie right away, would have been too much too soon. I think putting her
I mean,
on
she's
third,
also like 8.5 months pregnant.
Yeah, so
exactly.
so
I would have maybe put her
after.
exactly. So I maybe
You
would
wait
have put her
too
in
long.
as second.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think that putting her on as third was a mistake that they made because of where we are today, where they're discussing a possible mistrial, if there isn't enough time to properly cross her. But
And then redirect.
yeah, exactly. And then redirect, exactly. So pursuant to that, I probably would have put her as second, but definitely not first. Too much too soon.
Yeah. Talk about her credibility, because, Jay, with these notes, we're looking at
That you
text
can or can't
messages.
read.
We can't read this.
At all.
And, she comes across, she's very emotional.
Nick, I'm
You
proud of my
definitely
notes.
see
I'm proud of my notes.
abuse. Yeah, but there's some
You're
things in there
well-versed.
that we can't,
This is my
we can't
thing.
discuss or recite.
A lot of it. We can't
I like to
discuss.
keep my job. Thank you very much.
You got bills.
Thank you very much. Yes. I'm not going to say those here. This is not the platform for that.
Well, I
but
mean, in all
let's talk about
seriousness,
her
this is
credibility.
people's private business.
It's private business made public.
Yes.
And a
And
jury is watching
Everything.
on their own screen
Yeah.
in front of their chair, reading every one of these messages.
I think that her credibility, she came off as credible, if I'm going to be honest, both with the good and the bad. But that is what makes a credible witness, not someone that makes it seem like they're completely innocent. They had no involvement. They had no awareness. They had no engagement. That isn't what makes a credible or a good witness. It's someone that says, yeah, I messed up, or there were some bad facts or some things that I probably should not have done, but this is why I did it. And I think that her testimony was to give context to the control and the coercion and the pressure that she felt. I think that the issue is, did you feel that because you wanted to keep him happy, or did he project that upon you? Because as you noted, there are multiple times where she's saying, I want to make you happy. I want to engage in these activities. I want to specifically experience this. I specifically want you to watch this. And that to me seeks,
So break this down for me. What do you think the prosecution accomplished in its direct, and what do you think the defense has accomplished in its cross so far with Cassie?
Okay. In the direct, I think that they accomplished showing control, coercion in the forms of blackmailing, with him constantly threatening to release the videos. Also, there was this incident where they were on a plane and there were other people on the plane and he started playing the videos and she noticed that. So I think that also lack of resources. As you guys know, she was locked into a recording agreement with him that she never got to fulfill or really perform pursuant to because he had all of the resources.
Sorry.
Is that somebody from an entourage?
No, but wait a minute.
Was that your entourage?
No, this thing was on silent. I don't know what happened.
Somebody
Bootleg
broke
phones.
through?
Someone broke through.
It must be important.
There.
You want to grab
about
it?
that. No. Sorry about that.
I think that in regards to what the prosecutor or the prosecutors have done well, which by the way, they're phenomenal prosecutors, is showing that coercion, that control, that manipulation, and the power that he exercised over her rights and her choices. Because he was very involved in where she stayed and what she ate and what she looked like. That's what I think they did well. Then what I think was done well by the defense is, as you've noted, highlighted the ongoing consent. They actually, and I'll quote, "You fought for your relationship for 11 years," is exactly what the attorney said. And I think that this exchange and the hot and cold nature of their relationship, whether violent or not, is reflective of a lot of relationships.
But we prove domestic violence, we prove that control, we prove abuse, we prove drug abuse on both sides. So at one point, I believe the defense attorney is saying, yeah, he was on drugs too. That could have driven some of his actions.
Absolutely.
I think what we didn't know is we heard that Diddy overdosed, according to Cassie, in 2012 at the Playboy Mansion, had to be rushed to the hospital.
And not only that, an ongoing
Right, an
addiction.
ongoing
On behalf
opioid
of the
addiction.
both of them,
Who
she's
knew?
had to attend rehab. And
Right.
that was something that I never knew, I never suspected. But I agree with you. I think that putting those facts and those circumstances on the forefront speaks to his state of mind. And I think directly impacts his culpability, or what we call sometimes his mens rea, his intent to engage in criminal conduct. I'm not sure that during some of these events he was even there to really understand or engage or appreciate when she wasn't consenting, because in some of the text messages he's telling her, I want you to be happy. I want you to enjoy this. And there are moments where she's like, I'm sick. I'm not going to be able to make it. That's fine. No stress, no worries. Those are his exact words. So I think that there's a lot of different factors that are playing into this that can really lean both ways. But what I think really concerns me is there are certain things, like what happened with the escorts urinating on her, that I don't know if someone on the jury is going to be able to identify with someone who would consent to that.
Well, she, according to some of the testimony, she acknowledged, not just on the stand, but in the text messages, asking for that.
Yes, I agree. And not only that, she would contact the escort. She would be the ones to pay them.
She
but
said
again,
it was her job to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's my point. The prosecutors are letting it be known that it's all being orchestrated and it's all under the control and the direction of Diddy. But what I think is
and this could easily go both ways. You could see someone being coerced in an ongoing way to feel like that's what they needed to do.
Yes.
That's what she needed to do in order to keep him happy. And then the other side of that is whether it was genuinely consensual. I think there's so much here for the jury to parse out.
And I actually mentioned to you right before we were speaking about this, and right after the hotel incident, Cassie found refuge in a friend's house who called the cops. And the officers arrived on the scene. It was just her friend, and the cops.
And she didn't want to say who
She
it was.
did not want to name him. And when they asked her, she said she wasn't ready.
And how many times does that happen in real life, where you have someone who has called the police
and then
in a
backed
domestic
off.
right, and then backed
And
off.
won't
And then the
tell
prosecutor's
what happened.
angle is going to be, because I, especially as a defense attorney, how can you argue control? How is there control when the person isn't there, doesn't know what's going on? At that point, you've gotten away. Then psychological control comes in. And I know for a fact that the prosecution is going to put experts on the stand that are going to talk about that and how that control can haunt you, and you never really leave it. You never really think that you have the autonomy that you have, even when you're not in that person's presence.
And then talk about the age difference. Because
17 years.
17, so a 19-year-old, a 22-year-old, think about their state of mind, think about their, sense of responsibility. And then you have a 34-year-old or someone, that's climbing that career ladder. Different dynamic here.
I have a few things to say about that. The age difference is significant, if we're going to be honest, and they did meet when she was 19. However, they
And
did
romantic,
not
and got
start.
romantic when she was 21.
21.
Exactly. That is
21
what I was
and
going to
what,
say.
38?
Yes.
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 And I was going to say, for me, I don't think that's someone that's orchestrating a criminal enterprise with a predatory or abusive intent is going to wait 2 to 3 years in order to get their first victim, especially because when people do these things, it's usually they're seeking some sort of sexual or instant gratification. You're not going to wait 3 years to get that gratification.
You know what I've noticed,
That's
Yohayra?
a
I've
point.
seen you, explain both sides of this case.
Yeah.
And you have legal training.
That's what we love about her.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's why we asked her to come back, right? So, I mean,
Thank you.
just imagine how difficult this is going to be for the jury. Everyday people who are all of a sudden thrown into this legal, puzzle that they have to kind of like put all the pieces together and make decisions based on the law, not the comments.
And then leave
not
their
the,
personal
not
thoughts.
the gossip
Yes.
columns.
Put their personal feelings aside.
And
Right.
not only that, they have to submerge themselves into a world
That
that they've never had
Right.
That's
access
right.
to.
Right.
They don't have
That
a
they
clue.
don't even know exists. Because if I told my mother, hey, these are the things that occurred, and she consented, she will look at me and say, nobody in their right mind would ever consent to that.
Right.
And because I would never consent, she would never consent. And that projection occurs. And while it is the job of the jury to be impartial, to be neutral, to really find the truth, we are humans.
That's
Right.
right.
And these allegations and this exploitation is so extreme. I'm very concerned.
Alleged
with the alleged
exploitation.
exploitations are so extreme that I am concerned with the jury's ability to digest the information objectively and to detach their own biases and experience.
Nicole, last question.
Do we have a win here so far for the defense,
I mean, it's still
or a
early.
win
I mean,
here
it's an 8-week
for
trial.
the
This is week
prosecution?
1.
I know, but I'm all about. Let's focus in. Who's one up?
Okay, so I'll tell you guys my position. I also will acknowledge that I'm an aggressive attorney. I
No.
usually take the road less traveled. So 2 things that I want to say. Let's consider who we're up against. The feds don't lose.
What's their conviction rate? Is it 95 or 99?
It's between 94 to 96. I don't
Right.
want to misspeak.
Yeah.
But they'll take years building up the case because
they
they take
will.
no else. That's number
right.
1.
That's right.
But
And they keep coming back.
And
They
they keep
do.
coming too.
But at the same time, I think that the consent is seen throughout on behalf of every single individual. However, the sex trafficking concerns me because we now have had escorts take the stand, escorts traveling across state lines, orchestrated, funded, and at the direction of Diddy. And those are some of the charges and elements that concern me more, and those are the reasons why. But in regards to, for example, the racketeering, I think it's a reach, and I think it's interesting that it's a racketeering charge, but we've only had 1 person charged so far.
Yeah.
Are other people being charged, or what's going on? But again, these are the feds. You never know how they work, and like you said, they'll keep coming back.
Right.
They don't give up.
Let's leave it there.
We'll keep coming back too.
We're going to try to do this once a week at the end of every week so we can wrap up the week's events in the courtroom. And Yohayra Azcona, thank you so much
Of course. Thank you for
for
having me.
joining us for this inaugural edition of Dissecting Diddy. I'm Jay Dow for Nicole Johnson, and Yohayra, thank you so much again. And we'll see you next week.